Hello, my name is James Lattimer. I'm a member of the Berlinale Forum Selection Committee, and I'm very, very happy to be here with Zheng Lu Xinyuan, Director of Jetlag, one of the true highlights of this year's Berlinale Forum program. Welcome, Xinyuan.
Hi, James. Thank you for having me.
It's my great pleasure. So I'd like to start, I guess one of the things that I like so much about Jetlag is that it's very, very hard to pin down. I would offer a very succinct synopsis of the film, but I think it's a film that resists easy categorization to a certain extent. So I actually wanted to sort of turn the question around and ask you maybe to describe the film in a few sentences, just to give some sort of general impression. Also because I'd be interested to know whether how you see it is how I see it, because I think it is a very open film in the best possible way.
So I think first of all, it's like a very personal film, a very personal essay, something that I try to write through the visuals. So in a way, it's not really constructed around a very strong narrative, but it's almost a string of thoughts that I'm trying to follow and see how it turns out. As for the content of the film, it started as like an inquiry into my family mystery. And in the parallel storyline, I was kind of stuck in Europe, in Austria during the pandemic. So through that time, I'm looking into the family mystery and think about how diaspora, how intimacy, how the longing for someone really means when you have that distance between you and the reality, from you with the memory. So all of that kind of like started to form into this film, and I'm just diving in it and see like when they're at the end, I can catch a breath and understand what I've been through.
That's super interesting. I mean, I actually wanted to talk a little bit about those two sections of the film that you talked about, but also with the added dimension of time, because I think you within the film you can pick out maybe those two main threads. One thread is obviously you trying to return from Graz to China at the beginning of the pandemic, which obviously is not a particularly easy process, and the visualization of the steps of that process, including the quarantine and so on and so forth. And then the other main thread is your family's trip to Myanmar, from what I gather, a few years earlier, in search of your great-grandfather who emigrated there and then never came back to China. And so you have those kind of two main threads, but very often it's within those threads and with lots of the other material that's also included in the film, because there are then lots and lots of other snippets, lots and other sections, impressions, it can be very, very hard to kind of orient yourself temporally. In a sense, it's very, I think the metaphor of kind of swimming is also very apt in terms of how you feel as a viewer, that you drift between different temporalities in a very unusual, very agreeable fashion. And I would be super interested to know about your approach to editing and to time in general in the film.
So the editing process is pretty difficult. First, because like you said, it's a bit complex to manage your way through. But at the same time, it's also because the materials are really close to me. So how do I look at the material kind of determine how I approach it? When would you want people to absorbed by the situation? And when do you want them to be with you and look through the lens from your perspective? So these are kind of guidelines to start with editing. And also, like, I choose to use black and white in a way, I think it helps for people to get used to the drifting feeling. So when you land in a section, you start a scene, you don't exactly know where you are. There's no signs to tell you, okay, this is Graz, or this is Beijing, or you are in quarantine, or wherever you are. So I want people to get used to it and really look at what's happening. And to a point that you feel time is not that linear, and you just follow the film and see where it goes. So in a way, like, the destination is not that important. Like, what happened exactly to great grandpa is still a mystery somehow. And even people within the family cannot give you a very specific explanation. But by the end, what really important or what fascinating to me is how people remember and what's the weight for people to remember, especially during the pandemic. I think there are many losses happened worldwide, like when people just suddenly disappeared or with no chance to coming back. How do you deal with that within a short time or within a lifespan? Yeah. So I don't know if that really answers your question.
No, that answers my question perfectly. No, I think it's very interesting. Also, the idea of memory, because I think, I mean, when we think about memories don't unfold in our minds in a linear way. I mean, they kind of bounce all over the place and move around in a way that's much more guided by kind of feeling or affect, or rather than kind of, okay, on this day at this time this happened, and then 2 days later this happened. I mean, that's simply not how memory works.
Yeah. And I thought also, like in the film, I think because I'm editing the film at the present, and so everything happened is already past tense. So in a way, everything in the film is memory already.
Sure.
But within the film itself, we're trying to catch up with the time and catch up to the most current time phrase. So that's also like the editing logic of the whole thing. Like we're starting from a point in Graz, but also starting a point when we're trying to do a research into the past. And then we're trying to catch up with what's happening right now till like the most current moment of the reality. Yeah.
Thank you. That's super interesting. So I think we will watch now a short clip from the film, and then in a second we'll continue the conversation.
你呢？实际上你妈没有结婚，如果结婚生了孩子以后，感情就会不一样。
但我还是蛮希望他能享受爱情。
你妈已经错过时间了。
So I wanted, I mean, also slightly in reference to the clip. I mean, the clip obviously shows, I think, two of the things we kind of already talked about. First of all, that the film is in black and white, and secondly, your grandmother. And I'm going to maybe return to your grandmother in a second. But for the moment, I wanted to kind of maybe expand a little bit on what we were already talking about black and white, because there's the black and white in terms of the color, but there's also the format, because from what I could discern, the film is largely shot on black and white DV, with maybe some stuff on VHS and maybe some stuff on mobile phone. I wasn't entirely sure. Maybe you can.
Yeah. Yes.
Oh, okay, cool. That was
it's DV, iPhone, and also there are portions that we use Osmo, which is like a sport camera.
Ah, okay.
And there are like VHS footages as well. Yeah.
Ah, okay.
Archival.
Because I was thinking, I mean, both the use of black and white, in a sense, I mean, it's a very heterogeneous film, and this kind of decision to put all of the material into black and white, in a sense, imposes a homogeneity onto the film, and also therefore a coherence to the film that the material doesn't itself necessarily contain, which I think is super interesting. And on the other hand, I think also the choice of those formats is also very textural. I mean, I think there are so many scenes in the film where you kind of zoom in on something, and in a sense, the very shape or the very form begins to melt, or there's a kind of a grain to the image, and which also kind of creates a sort of a distortion and a flow, which again goes back into this idea of memory or kind of time unfolding in a non-linear way. And so I'd be interested to talk about, I mean, we talked about the black and white element, but maybe about the choice of shooting format, because it feels very, again and again when I was watching the film, I was like, wow, what is that? How is that shot? And what was that shot? There's this constant questioning of what the images themselves actually are.
So for the Myanmar part, the reason why I shot it on DV is because the family trip took place like out of a sudden. Like the family has been talking about it for many years, but it just never happened. So when my family informed me that we're going to Myanmar, like eventually I just have to just grab whatever I have and go. So that's partially based on like the limited condition that I have. But at the same time, when we get to the post, there is something more than what I want to say through the film. There are things that I want to play around and also keep by what the material offers. So there are things that I played with my colorist to just embrace the texture of the footage. There are things that we made more exaggerated than it already is, because I think how people experience image is not only through the plot, is not only through following the characters. There are things like once I think my colorist, she's also one of the characters in the film actually. She can actually tell me the humidity of the image. Sometimes she will tell me, oh, this must be shot as somewhere in the south because it just looks so humid.
Oh, wow, that's interesting.
Yeah, so many times I want to embrace what she can offer, and we attempt to bring the experience to the fullest instead of just tell a good story. So there are things that I will experiment with the image, and
I mean, I think it's super interesting to hear that you were, because I mean, to hear that there was obviously stuff done in the kind of the grading process and the color and the post-production process, because I wouldn't necessarily, I mean, I was always so unsure, okay, was that filmed like that? Was that played around with? Is that an effect of the conditions? Is that an effect of the situation of filming? Because obviously some of the shots are kind of filmed, I don't know, from like a hotel room window, from very, very far away. And obviously, some of the effect is, okay, you can't maybe get a precision, or you can't maybe get a focus from there. But it's super interesting to know that there was also this kind of creative layer in terms of, playing around with certain images to kind of add another layer of discourse to the film.
Yeah, and also I think the portable equipment, no matter like DV or iPhone, have its flaws, but at the same time, I think it also brings certain like intimacy. Like there are shots like in the bed, you're facing your partner. You won't like bring, I don't know, like in that context, I think using an iPhone is the most natural way for me to think about it. There are moments happened and you want to grasp it. And we are in like 2022, and I'm not so nerdy about equipment. I think what fits that situation works the best for me. And I think that kind of intimacy can really show on the screen and can reach the audience. And I think that kind of feeling being grasped by no matter what kind of equipment is the most important to the film.
No, for sure. That makes perfect sense. I mean, I wanted to kind of, that sort of idea of intimacy was actually now what I wanted to ask about, because I think, I mean, the film is obviously entirely autobiographical, and you shoot many of the people who are closest to you, your partner, your grandmother, your father, your friends, and you kind of answered it maybe a little bit already with respect to the iPhone, but can you talk a little bit about the challenges of shooting people to whom you obviously lack a degree of distance? Because, I mean, shooting a complete stranger where you have no emotional attachment to them is very different than shooting someone who you care about deeply. And also, can you maybe talk a little bit about your fascination with your grandmother? Because I really feel that every time she appears in the frame, it's almost the camera can't stop kind of looking at her or moving towards her. And I mean, I guess, at the beginning, it's talked about, okay, is there a protagonist in the film? Which is a question one could discuss at length. But I mean, I guess one candidate for the protagonist of the film would be your grandmother.
I think when I was little, I was really close to my grandma. And it's very interesting that in my grandma's family, it's like very female dominated. It's like she has 3 daughters and they're just all women. And we always like chit chat about men, and my grandpa just like ignore us. So I used to be really close to her, and there are stories she told me that she had never tell my mom. But then after I went to college and then like study abroad, and my parents divorced. So there is like a period of time that I'm not so close to her physically anymore. So by shooting this film in a way, it's also like me getting back to her. And I think when parents are looking at me, or when grandparents are looking at me, like I'm always the child in their eyes, but I'm also eager to let her know who I am right now. So by making this film, it's an attempt for me to actually get close to my family, in a way to, I don't know, to test like our real knowledge about each other, like the way we look at each other. And for my grandma, I think she's not that expressive. I think there are like historical reasons for her generation that they are not so used to share their feelings, or it's not so easy for them to tell us like what exactly happened at that time. Because when she was little, it's just very sensitive to say that you have a relative that is abroad. So it's like a very political sensitive thing at that time. Sure. So telling her story in a way, it is because I think that history should be told, and she is part of that history. And for the others, for example, the English class group, including my partner, I think like they're also like working in the creative industry, and in a way it's also like a very important task for them to get to know themselves. And we do share a lot, and especially because they're learning English in the scene, so using a foreign language, somehow it's easier to express something so intimate. Yes, so that creates I think a very interesting dynamic. Like people are sharing the most painful or most intimate thing, but saying it so out loud because we are learning English, like learning another language. And I like that kind of atmosphere. I like that kind of attitude. And yeah, I just want to show that situation. And it's also like very interesting for me to show them the finished film. I haven't, some of them did, but my grandma haven't. Oh, so wow. I'm also curious, about her reaction to it. So it's kind of an action. It's kind of an experiment that I'm doing.
Oh wow, that's super interesting. I would be very interested to hear how the family and how your friends respond to it. I mean, because I think there are these. I mean, I think the scene you talked about, where some of your friends, I think one of your friends talks about the experience with her uncle, and it's somehow so, it does tap into a directness of feeling that I don't know. I mean, I guess, because when you speak your own language, you have far more opportunity to kind of hide behind language. Whereas when you're speaking a language where you're still learning it, you don't, and you have to say things in a direct way. And I think in that scene, that works really beautifully, and it really is all the more moving, I think, to hear that because of that.
Yeah.
I think we have time for maybe one more question.
Okay.
I was watching an interview with you about your previous feature, A Cloud in Her Room, and you talked about it as the diary of a young woman. And it was interesting because when I heard that, I thought, okay, that could also very much apply to jet lag as well, because on some level there is a very strong diary element, obviously not within a fictional setup. And so I was thinking, to what extent, how do you see those two diary films that you made in relationship to one another? And also, so much of the material that you shot for jet lag, I was kind of wondering, I mean, so much of it seems so plucked from an everyday life, or kind of almost like without much of an intentionality, almost, or more kind of like, okay, I have the camera with me, I'm looking at things, and almost as if, okay, I don't know whether this will ever be used, or maybe it will be, but there's this sort of idea of just collecting material for the joy of collecting material without thinking about what function it might have further down the line. And I'd be interested to know whether I'm projecting there, or whether that's maybe, because that is also a kind of a diary gesture, shall we say.
I understand your feeling. So for The Cloud in Her Room, because there are also like people ask if it's like autobiographical, or like how much is related to like to your surrounding or like your happenings, like if that's your story. I think that's the freedom that given by fiction, that
Sure.
You don't have to be 100% honest. There are things that you want to see happen, that you want to see it happen. And so it's, I think I did take a lot from what I've seen, what I've experienced, or I have observed throughout my time in my hometown, because that's after a while it's a new experience to coming back to your hometown. But that's so much more free and so much more fun that you can work with actors, and there are things that we create within our between us. It's not directly from me or directly from the actor actress. It's something that almost created by the chemistry of the time, sure, the place, and the people. Yeah, but with jet lag, it requires so much more honesty. I think especially with nonfiction, there's just like nothing you can hide. Like even you're hiding, you have to use it as a gesture to expose yourself that somehow it's a touchy thing for you. And in a way, it's also to be honest. And what I mean honest, it doesn't necessarily need to be expressed in a very straightforward way. It can also be tell through other people's story. But yeah, so jet lag, to me, it's less of a diary, actually. Like, because because I have to look at myself more rationally and to face what I'm actually looking at, why I'm looking at, why I'm avoiding it. And it's not like writing freely about what you want to create. It's almost like looking through a small tunnel, and sometimes you look closely at the others, or you look at the other people's eyes, but sometimes you just turn around and realize you're facing a mirror, and you just cannot just remove the tunnel. So people will know, you just have to do it. But I think by doing this can actually help me to be more brave and to empathize with people better, and to face the doubt that I have for intimacy, for like grandma, like why she remembered a person that disappeared for her whole life. Yeah, because I think sometimes if you can really indulge in a moment to take a risk of being lost, maybe it has some value to it. Yeah.
No, that makes perfect sense. Thank you. Then thank you so much for taking the time. That was a super revealing and interesting interview. Thank you.
Thank you for great questions.
My pleasure. Then take care.
You too.
Okay.
Nice meeting you.
Yeah, nice meeting you too. Bye bye.